This episode is brought to you by Modal Electronics, who enable you to play and perform powerful sound with their incredible synthesizers. You can enjoy vibrant wavetable patches with the Argon 8 series, or you can produce with state-of-the-art analog-style synth textures with the Cobalt 8 series. To check out Modal Electronics' incredible array of synthesizers, go to modalelectronics.com. Modal Electronics. Dare to sound different. This is your first solo record in 25 years, right?
Yeah, it's my difficult second album, yeah. Took a while.
And what made you, when did you start working on it?
Probably 2019 when I was on tour with, around that period when I was on tour with Nick Mason, Saucerful of Secrets. I think I built confidence to approach a record. Because being the front man or one of the co-front singers of Saucerful, took me out of the shadow of, Tony Hadley, if you like, and Spandau, and put me down the front, concentrated more on the voice and also guitar. I think in Spandau, there's never many moments to play lead guitar. And suddenly I was, being judged by the Pink Floyd fraternity, who are, pretty discerning and forensic, playing Gilmore parts, if you like, and expanding on that as well, because we're not like a tribute band. We're not just sort of copying the old Floyd stuff. We're allowed to develop it in our own way because we have one of the, it's because it's Nick Mason's solo project.
Yeah.
And I think that gave me a lot more confidence, but also I think reaching a certain age and really feeling that Spandau were behind me now, and there wasn't any chance of any reunions. I wasn't having to write songs and put them away for him. And I didn't have any acting stuff planned. I started looking at songs. Well, songs started coming out and they tended to be about me looking back. I think I started to realize that there's a song on there called I Remember You, which is about me as a younger man and how somehow trying to solve a few problems that were in my head about joining up my past selves, joining the dots, and how do they sort of fit into my life now. And I suppose there was quite a bit of that going on. And the other song that I came across first was In Solo, and it was about me really exploring the paradox of living in a big city, but at the same time, often, surrounded by millions of people, but feeling, I'm very isolated, feeling alone at times. And that was a story in that. And I was following this woman one day musically at the piano, not in real life, and her story of sort of going to work and the mundane really of that. And then the second verse, it's suddenly this guy appeared. And then it wasn't until later in the song I put them together. I bring them together at the end, because you realize actually, even though they're saying they're very alone, they're in a relationship here in the city, and maybe they're struggling in that. And it was sort of partly inspired by this painting by Edward Hopper of two people sitting in a room together, but not together. And in this painting, the woman has her finger resting on a piano. And I was sort of wondering what would happen if she started to play this music. And that's when In Solo came out. And I suppose because, I do have a little bit of a theatrical background, and I'm not scared of the drama of that. I started to write a piece that I thought was not within the sort of conventions of pop music, and had a little bit more drama and theatre to it, if you like. And I suppose that some of that has come from working with Floyd, in that Floyd world where, you can have long intros, you can expand music, you don't have to stick everything into 3.5 minutes. Although in saying that, there are songs on here that are 3.5 minutes as well. So the album, I don't think I was thinking about making a record. I was just doing stuff for myself. And then when I wrote Waiting for the Band, I found myself writing a reflection on being a fan and loving music I think there was something quite thrilling in that for me, because I've always been, I fell out of love with music a few times over my life, and whether or not it's sitting in a court fighting my position as a songwriter, or whether it's because I'm on stage and I feel like, oh God, I just want to be a theatre actor forever. But then I came across this song that was about growing up as a fan and being obsessed with music and the tribalism of music, and following, running after bands, and how that feeling. I was sitting at this piano and writing this piece of music, and thinking, God, that feeling is still with me. I still love that thrill. I still want to bump into the next big thing. I still want to be turned on by music. And so I wrote this song, and then I decided right in the middle of it, I'd actually walk myself back into the Hammersmith Odeon in 1973 and wait for Bowie to come on stage, and the band would then arrive. And then I just kept on expanding it, and I found a bunch of interviews by some Bowie fans from 1978 outside Earl's Court, and I just took those bits of dialogue and I put them under the music. And this was when I knew I wanted to make a proper album. Sorry, that's a very long answer, Tom.
No. I mean, I want to keep on listening about it. But when you're writing these songs, are you one of those people who, when they're kind of on the go, if you're sitting, traveling somewhere, you get these ideas, or do you tend to have to sort of schedule time, like, now's my writing session?
I would have done in the past. This is the first time that I was so keen to get words down. There's only one Spandau Ballet song that I ever wrote words first, and that's Through the Barricades. This album was mostly being written words first. So when I was on tour in America, I remember I wrote 3 or 4 songs without any melody. A Rumor of You was one. I Am the Past was one. They were just, and I really enjoyed doing that. And once I start writing lyrics on it first, there's only one person I can give that to. That's got to be for me, because, I'm these words are about me. They're versions of me. And I think every song on the album is something autobiographical, even if it's a story, like in A Rumor of You, which is rather this slightly bizarre, sinister story of a man. You're not quite sure if he's stalking a woman he's never met before, or if he's obsessed with a woman from a relationship that he's had in the past, and he's looking for clues on how to get back with her. Sometimes these are elements of me and experiences in my life that I can blow up into part fiction, part truth. But I think if you get to my age, you've got enough experiences in your life to know to find enough stories that are based in a certain amount of reality. When you're in your 20s and you're writing, you're making most things up. But when you get here, you think, well, I've got enough tragedy, enough, stuff, great friendships that have lasted for years, terrible friendships that have fallen apart, tragedy, divorce, whatever. You can draw on all of that and make it into a record. And I think in many ways, both sonically and lyrically, I was trying to write an album that was a sort of reflected a lot of elements that have, in my life, a sort of scrapbook, if you like, of who I am up to this moment. That I could, even in areas of music sound, I was looking to try and emulate some of the stuff that really turned me on in the 70s, maybe, that I could get in there, that I would recognize for myself.
Yeah, I mean, this album is full of because I'm a huge fan of music from the 70s. It's interesting that you say that you started some of those songs, and I mean, those songs that you mentioned do have great lyrics, but it's full of great melodies as well. And the production's very interesting. Where did you record this album?
So I started doing all the demos at my little home studio, really. And and then I needed someone to help me. Sorry, there was a plane in the background. That's a military plane flies overhead every now and again while I'm here. I needed someone to help me, and I turned to Toby Chapman, who was a keyboard player with Spandau Ballet for years, and he's been a kind of musical buddy for a long, long time, decades. And I said, look, Toby, I need to do some lead vocals on this, and I don't want to do that at home on my own. And so we went into Rack Studios. This is a very old studio in London that used to be owned by Mickey Most, and is still in his family. He was a famous producer who produced Susie Quattro and Hot Chocolate, and a lot of hits came out there in the 70s. And it's a great old studio. And we went in, and he helped me a lot on the vocals, and that was a kind of commitment, really, because things can sit in my studio in demos for ages. But once I decided to spend some money in a proper studio, I was committing to putting this album down and working on it. And then that was just before lockdown, and there was on a couple of tracks that I'd already sort of started to work on. And then once lockdown happened, I found, I'd had to do a lot of it remotely. So I'd already programmed, and I was working with Toby remotely as well. And we'd programmed all the drums and bass on a lot of tracks as I was writing them. And then I wanted real musicians. So I found, first of all, Ash Sohn, who's a great drummer. He's got his own studio in a windmill in Norfolk. He plays on lots of, Adele tracks and Amy Winehouse and Robbie Williams. And he works on all the Trevor Horn stuff, Rod Stewart. And he was great. And we just found that actually worked really easily, because the computer screen was like a studio screen, studio window. And things went backwards and forwards a bit. And, I'd say, oh, no, don't add that. Try and make it more like my program version, but give it feel. And then I did the same with Richard Jones. He plays with a feeling, and he did some tracks for me. He played on the single.
Ahead of the game.
And that started to work really well. And then I expanded that. I worked with Jed Lynch from Peter Gabriel's band. He did some tracks played on in solo, and not the Haunted. I Remember You. And then as the studios opened up, I started working in Metropolis and, setting up my, doing all more organic keyboards and, putting my amps up and getting proper studio sounds rather than the sort of stuff you get out of a little box on your computer, which I don't particularly love. So it was a bit of both. It was everything, really. But the odd thing is certain songs, like in solos, started to take on a very different resonance once lockdown happened, because the whole sort of drama of that, being alone in a city, suddenly, London's a ghost town, and you can walk through empty Oxford Street and Regent Street and Soho, and the song seemed to be extraordinarily, prescient. In a way that I'd never realized.
I mean, I was interested to know kind of when you wrote, because it could easily have been that was something that you wrote post-pandemic, but it's definitely got that, new meaning and resonance. And
well, I think one of the pandemic songs, in a way, but it's kind of, there's a lot of pressure when we were all doing homeschooling and everything, and the fear and all of that. We're all hungry for the news all the time. And there's a song called Too Much. Roger Taylor plays drums on that.
Wow.
And I just basically sat at the piano and just wrote the whole thing in one sitting. And it's really, you hear a lot of musicians singing about saving the planet and what you must do and what you mustn't do. And, it's all in their songs. It's all in their social media posts. And I just wrote a song which was about how I just want to hide away. I can't deal with it all. There's too much, there's chaos on the street, I just want to curl up with the one I love, I mean, I don't want to bail out of this, but this is how I feel right now. Of course I don't want the earth to be burnt out, but it's all too much. And it seemed to work, I mean, as far as hooks are concerned, even when I write lyrics first, I'm very conscious of the rhythms and the scansion. And once I've developed a verse and a shape of a verse, I'll make sure I repeat that exactly in the next 2 or 3 verses, and then so they're kind of ready made to build hooks and melodies around. And a rumor of you, I had 3 different melodies for it. Well, I had 2, and I kind of wasn't that happy with them. They weren't really selling the story. They were kind of too up tempo. They didn't have a darkness about them. And then somehow I tripped on the melody that ended up as the final tune.
And how did you kind of decide between them?
Oh, just a gut feeling,
Just a gut feeling,
yeah. This one sells the lyrics more. I can feel that, and that song, I didn't have the whole chorus section, which is "Desire is a hitchhiker that stole my attention." That was just a couple of lines at the end of the song, and then I was thinking, that's a waste. That's such a great line, and I wanted to, so I brought that in, and there's a bit where the chorus just fades up very, very, very. It's in the distance, you hear the singing, and then it gets louder. And I was saying to Toby, what I want to try and do is I want to imagine the chorus is someone on the highway in the distance, and they're like a hitchhiker, and I'm driving in the car, and I can see them getting bigger and bigger in the screen, and bigger, and then suddenly they're in my car. And that's so we tried to do that orally, and that quite a lot on the album, production wise. There are moments, it's a bit like an in solo when it goes into the big guitar solo and what I call the Greek chorus section in the middle on the that's in my head. That's the camera going right up into the city skyline and looking down upon everybody, and then making an objective view, and then it goes into an electronica section which is very paddy, and that's the camera coming back down and going into people's heads. I mean, I don't say that in the sleeve notes or sing that. But I think if you have these kind of ideas, you're trying to set them out orally, sonically.
Yeah, it's a huge sounding record, because I think I was either podcasting or had like radio on, and then suddenly you hear this album, it's like, whoa, like your whole headphones are just, and in terms of the strings.
That's a real orchestra,
Is that a real orchestra? Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it sounds like it's
we managed to get an orchestra in during lockdown, which was great, but we weren't locked down at that point. They're all wearing masks and everyone does tests and stuff, but that's I think it was important to get as many real human beings on it as possible.
Well, it's important as well for orchestras and for people in music to be able to work and to continue, because and I mean the song that you wrote, Too Much, must have a lot of resonance for many people, because everybody or most people have the best of intentions, and feeling for anyone who's affected by the pandemic and want to check the news, but countless people I've spoken to have just said it is just all too much. And loads of people, and myself included, like I've taken a break from any news for a while now, and it's a lot better for preserving your sanity, because it is just too much, and it's every minute of the day. And it's also your music stars as well are just always talking about politics and about social issues, and it's just, I would like to hear about some music.
I find it hard to get away from the news, I'm afraid. I'm slightly addicted to it, but I always have been. It's I don't get involved in culture wars, but I do there's too much of that going on. Recently, with the Harry and Meghan thing, it was like everyone I know who's had no interest in the royal family forever, who aren't fans of the royal family at all, were suddenly deciding they were totally on the side of Harry and Meghan, like it was really important that they should be on the side. It's like, but why are you suddenly caring about anybody in the royal family right now? You've never cared before, because there's this thing that if whatever subject occurs, everyone has to jump onto their cultural side. And people are flying flags for things they wouldn't have even bothered about a few years ago.
Yeah. And that's why taking time off it is good, because it is just like, when did we actually care? It was just a celebrity interview with Oprah, and it's just like,
with some wealthy people.
I mean, that's all it was, just kind of I'm sure there were some very important issues on a personal level for everybody involved, but at the end of the day, it was just very, very rich people talking amongst themselves whilst loads of the country are struggling. And
it seems to me.
But that's why, listening.
Of course, there's this other thing, which is fear that if you don't say something, you're going to be labelled for not saying.
Cancelled, yeah.
Man, we're all struggling with all of that right now. I'm running back to my piano again.
Yeah, well, music is music is like one of those things. Music and sport, it's a common denominator. People, I mean, there was the whole thing after the royal interview of Sharon Osbourne being cancelled, but I was kind of thinking throughout it, like Ozzy Osbourne, it must be like the perfect example of people from both sides of the culture war must be Ozzy Osbourne fans. And I know because I've seen all my mates from different sides of the culture war and who are Ozzy Osbourne fans, and it's just
so he is the
common
denominator.
Is Ozzy throughout all
but
this.
I'm not an Ozzy Osbourne fan.
Are you not? Well,
so where do I'm obviously not in the culture wars.
Well, that's a great way of removing yourself.
It was like, I have to say, when I look back on my 70s record collection, and I did plunder some of that for sounds and styles during making this record. I think you can kind of hear a little bit of late 70s on the single Ahead of the Game. But I'd be saying to Toby, this 10cc album, I love the backing vocals on that. The way, the glam backing vocals of Wings, I want to get that on there, my record collection is so madly eclectic from the 70s. But the one band that I don't have, and I'm not going to go back and find them, is Black Sabbath.
Yeah, I was never that big on Black Sabbath. I prefer Ozzy's solo stuff, but I'm getting more into it. But during lockdown, I read his autobiography, and I love music autobiographies and biographies. And his autobiography was the funniest book I've ever read. I mean, it was just ridiculous. It was just beyond. It was beyond the kind of like rock and roll cliche thing. It was just. And it seems like it was true. It doesn't seem like it would be too embellished. Who knows? But it was definitely a good distraction from lockdown. But so in terms of the albums, by the way, that you've selected for the sort of favorite albums section, would you say that these are categorically your like all-time favorites, or would these be like a snapshot of your favorites?
Absolutely impossible to choose all-time favorites. And I know you wanted them yesterday, and I was in the middle of something, and I'm like, oh God, how do I think of this? So it took me. I mean, I think it's.
Well, these are all. I mean, Humble Pie and Fairport Convention, I'd heard less than the first three, but I had heard those records before. But I revisited them yesterday because you did send them through yesterday. I mean. You've mentioned David Bowie already. Did you, Ziggy Stardust, did you get into that album as soon as it came out?
Okay, so Ziggy Stardust is really important because, there's all of us have that seminal moment, that catharsis that turns us into music, that makes us feel that we want to be a different generation to our parents. We never had records in the house. We did actually. We did. We had a radiogram. We had one record, I think. We had Billy Cotton's Wakey Wakey, which was like a music hall kind of vaudeville type radio show. But my parents weren't really big into music. The Beatles, whom I am obsessive with now, never came into my life at all for years because they'd split up when I bought my first record. And unlike now, when all kids are archivists, in those days, people only bought records that were out. And so I bought Paul McCartney records, I bought Wings, I bought John Lennon records, I bought George Harrison records, but the Beatles were just yesterday, so, I mean, sorry, that wasn't a pun, but this. And I'd buy the Rolling Stones, of course. But I suppose Mark Bolan was one of the first for me. But there was a moment, and a lot of people of my generation talk about it, when David Bowie appears on Top of the Pops in July, well, no, maybe not July, in 1972. And he sings Starman. And he looks like nothing that's ever come before. Or so I think, but he looks, he's got short, spiky hair. Everyone else has got longish hair. He's wearing this kind of glittery, sort of weird, shimmering onesie. And he does this thing where he puts his arm around Mick Ronson, and he's wearing paint. He's got painted nails. They look kind of together, like this androgynous feel to them. And he points his finger down the barrel of the lens, and he said, "Yeah, I had to phone someone, so I picked on you. Who?" And you think, he's picked on me. That's me. And I remember watching it at a friend's house, black and white telly. Who lived in Islington, down the road from where I lived. And I remember leaving that night and walking back to my house, just thinking, I just want to know everything else about this person. Of course, in those days, you can't go on the internet. So, you just wait for the NME to come out, or Melody Maker or something, and you hope there's something in there. And you go into the playground the next day, and all of you try en masse to try and remember every lyric, piece it all together from our joint memory of what this song was. And it was that moment. And I know Boy George talks about it, a lot of people talk about it, but it set the theatrical bar quite high. That's how pop music should be. It should be otherworldly. It should be greater than real life. That's why I was always so disappointed when Britpop happened. It was too, I don't want something that's exactly like the street. I want something to be bigger than the street, And Bowie was the sort of template for how all of us ended up wanting to be when it became our turn to be stars, if you like, or to go into the music business. Whether it's me and Visage and Duran Duran and Boy George and all of the 80s bands, Japan. We did it like David. We dressed up. We became slightly greater than the norm. And, even on the street, it wasn't just that we were in a band. All my friends wanted to look larger than life, paint their faces and wear clothes that were different and have their hair cut differently. And that, I think that moment can all be traced back to Starman. Of course, Starman is on the Ziggy Stardust album. Mick Ronson's guitar affected me as a guitarist. I still to this day can listen to this album, and I can hear myself playing in a style that is aspiring to Mick Ronson at times. And it took me into another place that was it's a concept album. It's about a rock and roll alien who comes down to earth, slightly suicidal, I suppose. And it's a very loose concept, but there is a concept that runs through the album. And so because it's such an important moment in my adolescence and in my in the architecture of my musical self, then it will always be on the list.
Yeah, I mean, it would probably be on a lot of people's lists. And did you stay being a massive Bowie fan throughout all the different genres and incarnations?
I mean, I saw him when I was a kid. I saw him at the Hammersmith Odeon, and I saw him at the Marquee. And at the Marquee, he did this show where he was he brought Ziggy back to life after killing him off at the Hammersmith Odeon, and he and the Spiders from Mars, minus Woody Woodmansey actually, but they did this thing for NBC, a TV special called the 1980 Floor Show. But this is in October '73 they filmed this, and I remember going along. Got a ticket through the fan club, and we went along, and he was filming for most of the day, and I was in the front row. And so during numbers, he would hang around on stage a bit. And I called him over, and I had on my wrist a Bowie bangle, they were called, with silver bangles. And I pulled one off, David. And he came up and knelt down, and he had this big orange thing on his head, obviously this opal, and no eyebrows. And he held the bangle. And for that moment, we were both holding the same silver bangle and staring into each other's eyes. I'm 14 years old, maybe 13. And he said, "Thank you." And he took it and he put it at the back of the stage. That, to this day, is the greatest moment I've ever experienced in music. You can have your Live Aids, you can have all these big concerts I've done. That alone, that gives me goosebumps now thinking about it. And that's what I was trying to do with Waiting for the Band. I was trying to say, nothing beats being a fan, because when you're on stage, you don't get goosebumps. Of course you don't. It's technical.
Really?
well, not goosebumps. You're thinking about you're too busy thinking about your musical stuff you have to do, you know.
Is it more like euphoria once it's finished and that it's
yeah. Well, you have adrenaline left over once you get out off stage, but that's sort of, you know, that buzz I get even today when, you know, you go and see a Rolling Stones show and just before the band comes on, you hear the music start. Oh my God, they're going to hit the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the Rolling Stones. And on they come with the firecrackers going. You know, that's how I want to feel, but you know, when I see music. But you can't feel like that when you're on stage. You're hoping the audience who bought tickets get to feel like that.
To feel like that. That's really interesting. And also that kind of description as well makes me very excited for hopefully, you know, post June or whenever it's going to be anyway.
But I did get to know David later on, and you know, he's a very, very funny man, and he was easy to talk to, which in many ways was a little disappointing because I wanted it to be bigger than reality.
Did you see him in extras?
Again, disappointing, you know. Come on, you know, David. I was
very surprised to see him in a TV show like that.
But I think that's because he's really funny. But that's because I think, you know, to be honest, I think I always wanted him to be Ziggy or Aladdin or the Thin White Duke, and they were my favorite parts that he played. I think
more like the classic era. Because later on, he kind of stopped doing that type of stuff, didn't he?
Yeah, so he makes great music, and then he'd stopped doing that, and that's really what I was in love with. I was in love with those bizarre characters.
Yeah. I mean, they are iconic, timeless. A Saucerful of Secrets as an album, is of course a classic album, but has a particular relevance to you being a member of the band of the same name. How did that come about? Were you friends? Or have you been friends with Nick Mason for a long time? How did that whole kind of band get formed?
I've known Nick for a long time. And of course, I've known Guy Pratt since the 80s. Guy played in Pink Floyd in the 80s and 90s. And then he's been David Gilmour's bass player forever. Guy's amazing. He's played with Madonna and Michael Jackson, Roxy Music. He's one of our great bass players, and he's been a mate. And I didn't know Lee. I didn't know Dom. It was Lee's idea. Lee Harris, who played with the Blockheads, and he said, I think he saw David and Guy playing once in France where he lives, and he just thought, you know what? Why isn't Nick going out? Why isn't Nick going out? Well, Nick can't go out and do what David and Roger does, which is play with 10 musicians, which will swallow him up on stage because he's the drummer, and more people doing Comfortably Numb and doing Dark Side of the Moon. And we don't need another band to do that. There are enough tribute bands, and there's David and there's Roger. So he had this idea of like exploring the back catalogue, the pre-Dark Side of the Moon stuff, which is 5 albums, the Syd Barrett stuff. Of course, Syd connects very deeply with David because there wouldn't have been Ziggy Stardust if it wasn't for Syd. You know, if you look at Syd's whole personality in music and the way he sang and the way he looked, you know, this was a massive influence on Bowie. And of course, the first time I'd ever heard See Emily play wasn't by Pink Floyd. It was by David Bowie on Pin-Ups, his album of homage album to all his favorite tunes growing up. Lee told Guy thought, you know what, Nick's never going to do this. He's driving his sports cars. He's not played in a band for 20 years. And Nick said, yeah, no, I'd quite like to think about this. Can Gary be in the band? So we had a rehearsal tryout and we started playing, and it came out really, really well. We did a friends and family and we got great response. And of course, then the Pink Floyd fraternity went, you know, Christ, why is this guy from Spandau Ballet playing in Pink Floyd? You know, what's he going to, he can't play guitar, surely, you know, fabricated pop band from the 80s, you know. And I love it when people say that. It's like when I first got the part as Ronnie Cray in The Craze, everyone, you know, what's he doing? He can't be a gangster. You know, I think you got to, you know, believe in yourself, stick your neck out. What's sort of annoying in life is that everyone has you thinks they've got you down. Everyone thinks
Yeah.
they know everything about you. Of course they don't. And I got accepted by the Floyd fraternity. It's worked. So so this album now is a really important album for me because it's, it's where we got the name, but I've got to know that music so intimately. And this is an extraordinary album because songs like the key song, Saucerful of Secrets, the title track, is, what they're doing there, no one had really done that before. That's complete atonal. I mean, if anyone's done it, it was, maybe classical musicians, writers, some sort of, modernist writers, but, they're doing that atonal kind of soundscape stuff that, and it's great to play live. You just go on and when you do that track and you just make noise, but it's kind of structured noise. It's broken down into 3 parts. We know where we're going with it, but it is random and it's atonal and it clashes. And then out of it comes this extraordinary chord sequence that's so ethereal and beautiful. And what it's doing is it's righting all the wrong that's come before it. It's if there's been a battle, it's the clearing up and the ordering, and it becomes triumphant and greater than reality and greater than all the noise. But it only works. Those chords only work at the end of Saucerful of Secrets because of the chaos and the noise that has been put there before. That's genius. And it's not a song you can whistle, but it's not even a song. I do get to sing a bit, but when we did it on stage, we made it our own. And I end up doing a guitar solo at the end, which isn't on the record. And but there's also another track on that album, which is Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. And it's kind of really mad that was the very first song I ever played with a band in my entire life. Really? So when I was 12, I ended up going down to a friend's house and jamming this song all day with about 4 other musicians. One of whom is Phil Daniels, who's a famous actor, was in Quadrophenia and, Oh. And but I was in, so that was my first band, and then all these years later to actually be doing it, and I remember doing it at the Beacon in New York, and Roger Waters came on stage, and
that's amazing,
and did the song with us, so that was quite thrilling and strange at the same time.
Are you due to be going back out?
Well, something just popped up in my diary today that we were meant to be playing some concert somewhere that I had forgotten to take out my diary, but it's all been moved now till next year. So we're doing, I think American dates are being sorted out as we speak, but we will be doing Britain in the spring and then Europe just after that.
Oh, that'd be amazing. It's a great idea as well, as you were saying, in the sense of there's already David and Roger, and then the tribute acts are major acts, aren't they? So to be doing a different part of the catalogue that's way more interesting, that isn't being played endlessly, but is unbelievably iconic. Yeah, and really difficult to tackle as well.
Nick's come out of his shell and he's playing incredibly well, and it's brilliant what he's doing, and we have fun. And and the funny thing is, if you see us, you can get the DVD and see us. There's a performance of us playing in London at the Roundhouse, if you haven't seen us. But we're not like Roger, we're not like David, we're not like any of the tribute acts in that none of us wear black t-shirts and we smile occasionally. So there's this whole thing about Floyd that you have to be so earnest and serious, and everything has this grandeur and importance about it. And I think Nick's not that person, and so we were trying to change it up a bit.
That's refreshing. It's very true. David and Roger seem to be, the black t-shirt is definitely the uniform for both, which is a coincidence, as they don't seem to get on very well. But so another incredible album, very different, probably my favorite album ever, is Abbey Road. And but you mentioned that during the 70s, people weren't kind of great archivists. So when did you first get into Abbey Road?
Do you know what? I didn't get totally into the Beatles. Beatles are, it's like some beautiful woman lived next door to me for 20, 30 years, and I never noticed her. And then one day she walked out of her door and I went, oh my God, I'm in love with you. I need to know everything about you. And that's what it was like with the Beatles. They've always been there. I knew about them. They kind of, I remember seeing them on TV when I was a kid, briefly before I was even interested in music. And then I think Giles Martin's remix of Sgt. Pepper's, just that they suddenly are so alive in the mix, because what he did, where he went back to all the original tapes and he put them on hard drive, because when they made those albums in those days, they only had 4 tracks, and they would, at the max, and they would record some stuff and then bounce it down and copy that onto another tape, and then they had a few more tracks, and then they'd bounce that down and copy that onto another tape, and et cetera, and things would devalue sonically. And so he went back and he put it all on master tape, and from the beginning, every single first recording, and I thought it was extraordinary. They were alive, they were present, and they were in every way beautiful. I think, I just started to eat them up, and read everything and listen to everything and become convinced that it was the greatest story ever told. And you realize there's a great book. There's a book by Mark Lewison, which he's only written the first part of. It's a trilogy, and it's 1,500 pages long, and it goes up to 1963 when they walk into the Abbey Road to record their first song. And it's all about the social history of Liverpool and how that it could never have happened in any other place. And rock and roll was American. It was always going to be American. Didn't belong to us. The Shadows did instrumentals. There was Cliff Richard, who dabbled in, who was the first rock and roller in this country with Tommy Steele. Mm. That didn't really last. They went into light entertainment as quickly as they could. But Liverpool is the dock where vinyl comes off the boat from America. So it's the first place to get all the records. And of course, Nems was the record store owned by Brian Epstein in the middle of Liverpool. Oh, just by the side, I have to say that I recently just bought Brian Epstein's telephone book from the 1960s in auction, which has got some amazing names. Yeah, of course you can't phone Mayfair 453 anymore, to see if Susan George is there or whoever, Marianne Faithfull. So the social history of Liverpool is really important in why it became the Beatles. And of course, all those trips away that they did. But Abbey Road, anyway, in Abbey Road, I could have picked any Beatles album and told you why it was the greatest album. But I particularly go back to Abbey Road if I'm not sure what Beatles album to put on. It flips between that and Revolver, really. But I particularly loved side 2. But also on this album, George has become a great force. He was unbelievable. And Here Comes the Sun. He's never written that. Everyone, it was to be in the shadow of Paul and John, and then suddenly, you think, what, I can write a great song too. And he writes 2 incredible songs. I think Something is the most covered song that the Beatles ever wrote.
Yeah,
ever recorded.
Such an amazing.
And side 2, where they're not afraid to stick all those 12 tracks together and make the elongated medley that they have at the end, at the whole of, the most of side 2, shows their, how extraordinarily avant-garde they were as a band. So they went from being, and the other thing people forget is they were really influenced by the Goons. All that humor was really important in what they did. But they, they went from being a basic, rock and roll band to unashamedly inviting in vaudeville and music hall. And so you end up with songs like, Maxwell's Silver Hammer. I know John pretended to hate that, but I think he
pretended to hate everything, though.
He was always jealous of Paul's
a pile of nonsense or something, didn't he? Like about a year after they released it, he said, it was all forgettable nonsense. Yeah,
but he wrote Benefit Mr. Kite, he still did mad stuff.
He loved it.
Yeah, it's part, and he was the goofiest of them all, the way. So that album.
It's an unbelievable record. And you were just talking as well about their Hamburg days. It sounds like you've definitely kind of devoured all the reading and everything around the Beatles since getting into them.
Well, yeah, and it's funny. Men are quite good at avoiding, talking about emotional things. I think. I don't know why that is. So and I don't do football anymore. I used to, but I don't do that now. So, I need to talk about something. So, so a few weeks ago, I remember, well, not a few weeks ago, a few months ago, I went out for a beer with a friend and we were out for like 3 hours. And I came back and my wife's like, how's his family? What's going on? how they getting on with the kids? I went, I have no idea. What did you talk about? Well, we spoke about the Beatles for 3 hours, and the Beatles just gives people who don't really want to talk about real life. It gives you everything. It's got so many different elements that you could just talk for days. In fact, there's podcasts galore on the Beatles, and
it's that just really sums up why the Beatles was, and that goes for any band, but particularly them because they're kind of the band.
Gift that keeps on giving.
Fill in that blank, and. Yeah, amazing. So the Humble Pie record, performance Rockin the Fillmore.
Yeah, I love live albums. And this was one that my brother and I played all the time in the 70s. There was this one and a Rory Gallagher album called Live in Europe. Were really big. And I do this other podcast, Rock on Tours.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Amazing guests. I was going to ask about it as well. And obviously Guy, who's in Saucerful of Secrets with you.
Yeah, so we had Peter Frampton on. He plays in this particular version of Humble Pie. I love Steve Marriott. I love the Small Faces. I love that sort of Cockney arrogance that Steve had. He was before a lot of them. He was kind of like London's John Lennon, if you like. He was an actor as a kid. I think he played the Artful Dodger in a movie. Extraordinarily high, warbling, soulful voice. You could tell it would be a nightmare to live with. You could tell he was a dangerous guy who played really hard, and he died in the end because of that. But there's that element of danger about him that is so exciting. But this band, Humble Pie swing. I mean, they play a kind of music that there's other rock bands weren't really doing at the time, and probably still haven't done. And there's a line in it where he goes, "We go home on Monday, but I want to tell you, we've really had a gas this time. It's really been a gas." And my brother and I just thought, I just want to be in a band and go on stage and be able to say that to an audience. How cool! And no, it's a great record. It's got it's one side is Walk on Gilded Splinters, Dr. John, and it's stretched for about 25 minutes. Great guitar playing from Frampton. And then, of course, Frampton ended up making his own live album that was an even bigger seller, probably the biggest selling live album of all time. Yeah. Frampton Comes Alive. So he was a good guest. I really like having him on. But he left after that album. He didn't want any. And he couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't do the touring, I don't think. Yeah, So
did he have fond memories of making?
He's a really nice guy. I think he has fond memories of most things. But I could imagine Steve was quite a tricky guy to hang out with.
Yeah, I mean, for all people listening, Rock on Tours with Gary and Guy Pratt is, an unbelievable lineup of guests. And but when did you start doing it last year? That was when.
Yeah, we started doing it last year. Yeah. It's been going since September, and we do most of it on Zoom, like you do, and we just get another. Basically, Guy and I, we're quite witty when we're together. We like gagging and we like punning, and we were doing it nonstop on the tour bus with Nick, and the sort of the modern version of guys get a room is now guys get a podcast. Yeah.
It's true.
So we did, and then we get someone else in and we just have a chat with them, and we sort of concentrate on their life, and we're fans as well. So we're massive rock fans, and what's happening now is after having about 35 different people on, I'm starting to join the dots, the rock family tree, how people. Yeah, and it always goes back to the same thing. Beatles always goes back to the Beatles. Or Hank Marvin, who we also had on.
Wow. You had Hank Marvin on.
Yeah, we had Hank Marvin on.
Wow, that's impossible. Does he do many interviews? Probably not.
Oh, no, but he did for us.
And were you always kind of shadows?
No, I don't. No. I mean, I respect Hank, and I got to know what he did, but I mean, shadows were way before my time, and you know, but
because if you went into the Beatles, because I mean, the Shadows were like an influence to the Beatles, right?
Yeah, to a certain extent. Everyone wanted to sound like Hank, and Hank had the first Fender Stratocaster to ever come into the country that Cliff Richard bought. Cliff Richard brought in the first Fender Stratocaster into the UK. He bought it as a present for Hank, and now Bruce Welch has nicked it and has got it in his house.
To the final choice, which is Fairport Convention. Liege Lief.
I love this record so much. I don't know what it is about it. It doesn't sound like another record. I like English folk music. As a kid, Steve Norman and I from Spandau, we used to go to this local folk club. You know, we went to a grammar school, so there was all kinds of mixtures in there. And, you know, there was this whole folk revival going on in the early 70s. You know, people would go and get, you know, I knew these guys who played in a Morris dancing band, you know, I mean, it was like, and I became obsessed with this sort of English idyll, but also struggle, because these songs are, you know, folk music is often about struggle. It's about storytelling. And what you've got in this band at this point is you've got Richard Thompson, who's one of the greatest guitarists of all time, who I adore, and Sandy Denny, her extraordinary singer, ethereal, angelic in her deliveries, telling these great, you know, and a fiddle player, you know, Dave Swarbrick playing fiddle. I can go back to this album again and again and find myself listening, entranced by those stories and by the way that the combination of rock and folk is brought together. And these guys did it first. This was the really beginning of the folk rock genre that started and is at its best with Liege and Lief. There seems to be some argument amongst Fairport people about what is their masterpiece. Is it Unhalf Bricking, the one that came before it, or is it this one? This one for me is solidly decides to set its stool out as being folk rock, and has such a, you know, a sound of the past, of Englishness about it, of a fantasy, I guess, that I don't know about, of past hundreds of years ago, pre-industrial revolution, that I find myself desiring every now and again, living in central London.
Yeah, Fairport Convention, I need to listen to more of, because they were like the biggest.
Just listen to the ones with Richard Thompson. So Full House and Unhalf Bricking and this one, and where did we go on our holidays, I think is the other one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Gary, thank you so much for coming on the
Tom, thanks.
Full Time podcast. Really looking forward to the album coming out in solo. It's out June the 18th, right?
Yeah. And you can pre-order it now, and the single's out now.
Yeah, Ahead of the Game, which is awesome track. And also Rock on Tours, for people who are fans of this podcast. Check out Rock on Tours, which is a great podcast, incredible guests every week. So Gary, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Tom.
This episode is brought to you by Tingley. Tingley is on a mission to change the culture of gifting by encouraging everyone to give experiences rather than material things. Tingley's passionate team has handpicked the world's best experiences, including travel, adventure, romance, food, wine, and more, and brought them all together in one place. Tingley gives the recipient of the experience freedom of choice. Here's how it works. You purchase a gift box, Tingley sends an e-voucher or delivers a plastic-free gift box, and the recipient chooses from hundreds of experiences in over 100 different countries. There's no expiry date on any of Tingley's gift experiences. Tingley encourages us to give stories, not stuff, to treasure memories above possessions. To find out more, go to tingley.com. If you're enjoying the Greatest Music of All Time podcast, you can keep up to date with all of our latest episodes for free by subscribing. If you're watching on YouTube, the subscribe button is located at the top of the Tom Cridland YouTube page. It's also at the bottom right of any video that you watch on YouTube. If you're listening on an audio platform, such as Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can subscribe at the top of the page.